Phase 2 of our session this evening shifts to the work that was done in the exhumation and analysis of Emmett Till, and leading that team, a team that I participated in and had a chance to observe the leadership of our next speaker, is Edmund Donahue. Dr. Donahue was born and raised here in Chicago. He's a regional medical examiner for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in Savannah, Georgia today, and a former chief medical examiner of Cook County. He's a past president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, where I worked closely with him for many years, and the current president-elect of the Georgia Medical Society. In Cook County, he has played important leadership roles in the investigations of the 1979 crash of American Airlines Flight 191, the 1982 Tylenol cyanide murders, and the 1995 Chicago heat wave disaster, in addition to the case he's going to talk to us about tonight. Dr. Donahue.
I too remember when Emmett Till died. I remember the Chicago Tribune coming to our house and my father saying that they killed a young man in Mississippi because he whistled at a white woman. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened when the body got back to Chicago, but before I do that, I want to introduce you here to the sheriff of Tallahatchie County, H.C. Strider. If there's a villain in this story besides the people who killed Emmett Till, I would nominate Sheriff Strider. Sheriff Strider was the one who responded to the scene. He had Mose Till identify the body when they took the ring off his hand. Mose told him he couldn't do it right away. He wasn't sure, but he wanted to go home and ask his children if this was Emmett's ring. When he then said, as he was leaving, he turned around and said, "I want that body buried immediately." He signed Emmett Till's death certificate and released the body to Emmett's family. When the family pressed for a burial in Chicago, he insisted that the casket and the burial container be sealed and never be opened. Later, during the trial of Milan and Bryant, he appeared as a witness for the defense and raised doubts about the identification of the body. There were all sorts of rumors going around about the identification of the body. One of them that was Emmett Till was alive and walking the streets of Detroit, and that the NAACP had dug up a body and put Emmett Till's ring on his hand. So the allegations were really getting crazy. On September 2nd, 1955, Emmett Till's body arrived at the Illinois Central Station, which used to be right down Michigan Avenue at 12th Street, and it was contained in a sealed wooden shipping container. Emmett's mother, Mamie Till Bradley, was overcome with emotion at the time. With Mamie Till here are Bishops Isaiah Roberts and Bishop Lewis H. Ford of the Church of God in Christ. You Chicagoans probably are already familiar with Bishop Lewis H. Ford because there's an expressway on the southeast side of Chicago named after Bishop Ford, who later became the presiding bishop of the Church of God in Christ, and people tell me that in his church that would be the equivalent of being the Pope. In spite of the promises that had been coerced from the family to get Emmett Till's body returned to Chicago, when the body was returned, Emmett's mother decided that there would be an open display of the body. And she insisted on a public funeral service with an open casket to show the world the brutality of the killing. And this photo was published in the Chicago Defender and Jet magazine. A.A. Rayner, the funeral director, and after looking at this autopsy, I've got to say that I think Mr. Rayner did an excellent job in the preparation of the body. It was a most unusual request to have a badly decomposed body come and have an open casket funeral. It presented a number of problems. But Mr. Rayner was able to obtain a glass-covered coffin which is a most unusual item. This is kind of the item that you might bury a pope or Eva Peron or someone like that, some personage. I guess you might also bury a dictator who you might be afraid somebody might walk into the wake and throw something on. But it's a very unusual item. And Rayner's did something very interesting. When we opened up the casket, we found that in the bottom of the casket there was charcoal, which I presume was to absorb odors, and there was also straw, which I suspect was to absorb moisture. And by the bacteria that cause postmortem decomposition, yes, we're going to have to talk about an unpleasant subject here, postmortem decomposition, but the bacteria that cause it, one of the interesting things about them is those bacteria are already in your body. And as long as your heart is beating and supplying blood to your bowel, you have the upper hand. But as soon as your heart stops and blood is no longer being supplied to your bowel, those bacteria in your bowel then start migrating throughout your body. And these are principally anaerobic bacteria. And one of the hallmarks of anaerobic bacteria is a bad odor. It's, when you're on the wards and you have a patient who's got a discharge and it's a foul odor, you can pretty much be sure you're dealing with an anaerobic organism. Well, we're going to talk a little bit later about the things that Mr. Rayner did to overcome that. But so, and that's what we call putrefaction. And putrefaction doesn't smell good. It kind of smells like dirty diapers without the urine component. And what he did by putting the charcoal and the straw in there, he converted it into another form of postmortem decomposition, which is called mummification. When you take the moisture, the bacteria need moisture to do this putrefaction. When you take it, the putrefaction stops, and the skin becomes dry and leathery, and that's actually a preservative. It preserves the body, and that was why we were able to tell the things we were able to tell 50 years later. This is an article that was published in Jet magazine, and Mrs. Till was absolutely adamant that these pictures be sent all over the country. And these very vivid photos and their strong images became a rallying point for the civil rights movement. And in fact, Rosa Parks, at the time she refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man, said she was thinking of Emmett Till at the time. Newspapers around the country covered the stories and were very critical of the state of Mississippi, and intense scrutiny was brought on the state of Mississippi regarding black civil rights. Unfortunately, the effect in Mississippi was to rally around Mississippians, and which eventually transformed itself into supporting the killers. This is a picture of the Roberts Church of God in Christ. And tens of thousands attended Emmett Till's funeral or viewed his body over the Labor Day weekend. That was another interesting thing that happened. This was all over the Labor Day weekend. The funeral was on Saturday. I imagine the body could not possibly be buried till Tuesday. And during that time, tens of thousands of people paraded past that coffin. Mamie Till Bradley attended the trial of Milam and Bryan and testified as a witness about the identification of Emmett Till and about the identification of the silver ring that was found on his hand. And she's seen here talking to the press after her testimony. Shortly thereafter, Mrs. Till addressed an anti-lynching rally in Harlem. And she later went on a speaking tour for the NAACP and was unusually successful in both raising funds and recruiting new members for the NAACP. Emmett's mother, now Mamie Till Mosley, attended Chicago Teachers College and graduated cum laude in 1960. She worked as a Chicago public school teacher from 1960 to 1983. In 1973, she trained the first group of children in what became known as the Emmett Till Players. And these children would recite the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. During her life, she never stopped advocating for the reopening of the investigation of her son's death. She died at age 81 in 2003 just before this investigation was reopened. Emmett Till's contributions to the civil rights movement have been honored and memorialized in a number of ways. In 1989, Emmett Till was listed as one of the 40 martyrs for the cause on the Civil Rights Monument in Montgomery, Alabama. In 1991, which would have been Emmett Till's 50th birthday, a 7-mile stretch of 71st Street in Chicago was renamed, given the honorary designation of Emmett Till Road. Now, this was one of the first times this happened, and today we have a number of these honorary dedications, but nobody ever got 7 miles of road. Today, if you have an honorary dedication, you get about 2 blocks if you're lucky. This is really unusual. In 2005, Emmett Till's grammar school, the James McCosh, was renamed. This is located at 65th and Champlain in Chicago, was renamed the Emmett Till Math and Science Academy. Now, it's not unusual that somebody who went to the Chicago Public Schools might someday merit a school being named after him, but it's most unusual to go back and to have this very school that you attended named after you. Again, in 2005, this sign was dedicated on the bridge over the Dan Ryan Expressway at 71st Street. And also in 2005, 2 counties in Mississippi, LaFleur and Tallahatchie, dedicated U.S. Highway 49 East that runs between Greenwood and Tutwiler, designated that as the Emmett Till Memorial Highway. This was the highway that the body took on the way to the railroad station on its return to Chicago. Now let's talk a little bit about our work on the Emmett Till case and the identification. This silver ring was bought by Louis Till, who was Emmett Till's father, in Casablanca in 1943. It bears Louis Till's initials, LT, and it bears the date May 25th, 1943. The ring was removed from the hand of Emmett Till when his body was recovered from the Tallahatchie River and given to Mose Wright, his uncle. Although great care has to be exercised in identifying bodies by personal effects, I would say that this ring is a one-of-a-kind item. And I can tell you in our experience in the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office, sometimes we would have to identify people on the basis of personal effects because no other records were available. And I guess it's a good time to talk about how you do identification. Basically, identification is a process where you compare information that was recorded before death with information that you obtained from the examination of the body. And if they correlate, the identity is established. And so what this means is that before you can make an identification, you need a lead as to who the person is. A lead is an educated guess about who it might be. Well, here they had a lead. The lead was that it was known that a black youth had disappeared in Mississippi and in this area, and then a body that was a black child rose up from the Tallahatchie River. So I think the identification issues are bogus. I think it's simply a rationalization for the not guilty verdict. As I understand, there were no dental records or fingerprint records available for Emmett Till, so these couldn't be compared. And we'll talk a little bit more about the other things that we did for identification.